is in fact the solar cell example. The previous example was theory, but let me give you a real example then. So what 4Power does is, for many applications, you can think about in the crystalline world of solar cells, right, which are generally the highest performance ones. You can think about having, silicon cells at one end, and then, in the spectrum of cost and everything else, you have 3,5 cells. So 3,5 cells are formed from elements in the column 3 of the periodic table, like gallium, and column 5 like arsenic, so gallium arsenide and different compounds like that. So it turns out that there was an innovation process that ran because of the satellite market that created solar cells at this end. And so these are high efficiency. The original, I think the record today, the problem is there's something called concentration, which changes the numbers, and you got to compare apple to apple. So without concentration, let's just call these things, in general, 30% or a little bit higher. So you can go a little bit greater than 30%, and people are pushing this, and over at this end, the sort of sexy high end is, say, 24% or so, but it's very expensive silicon, but still much lower cost than this, right? So now you'll see what the marketplace is willing to pay, because these solar cells are orders of magnitude. So we're talking without giving away any secrets. Obviously, over time, we've investigated the different costs and things like that through various mechanisms. And let's just say that we are talking about thousands or so, right? So, for example, you might have things like $50 to $100, depending on the technology, per watt installed, versus $1, right? So that's a 100x there. It depends on the metric you're looking at. So you're talking about hundreds or thousands, depending on the particular metric you're looking at, cost difference. Now the performance difference is kind of interesting. With concentration, if you're looking at that, these things can get over 40, right? But in the satellite market, they're not concentrated in general. And so, this huge difference in cost is supported by the fact that you're getting, say, in reality, most of these installed ones might be 20. It's kind of a hero sample. Let's just compare 20 and 30, low 30s, right? So for 30% more efficiency, you're paying orders of magnitude. So that market, the satellite market, is kind of interesting, right? Because it's willing to pay a premium, and that's where that particular innovation process converged. Where silicon has been converging more on the terrestrial marketplace, where it traditionally has had to compete with hydrocarbons. So two completely different innovations process. Not surprised that they produced different solar cells. So you have this huge spectrum difference where, on the scale of what people think about, there's an efficiency increase in this direction, there's a cost increase in this direction, and there's other things like weight. There's a weight increase in this direction. So there's several things that change, and this is really considered, you might have heard this before, a niche market. Although, not necessarily from a small company point of view, this is at least hundreds of millions of dollars. Now this is billions, but of course there's zillions of companies, and it's very mature and all that sort of thing. So, this is kind of how it's broken down. Now, what 4Power is based on is the fact that we can take these materials and put them on this platform, and for much of the process manufacture it in this infrastructure. We kind of created a hybrid technology now because we can access some of the lower costs of, you know, the lower cost end of things. Plus, we can get the high efficiency of these thin film materials. So in a sense, it's kind of, you know, closer to this end. Now, of course, one of the key things to remember is what we talked about a long time ago is the universal volume cost curve, right? Remember that the silicon industry is way, way out here. So even if we can put these materials on here and 4 powers initially manufacturing, our volumes will always start lower, even if we're on the same curve. So our costs will always be higher. So one of the early things we recognize is you have to start at this end and move in this direction. That is, that you're always going to be sort of, you'll start off at high efficiency, but you'll be more expensive. And as you grow your markets, you'll be able to hot markets. And, you know, someday you could be, you know, at huge volume, but that's not really that relevant. So even though everybody wants to start the innovation process looking at market and technology and implementation, it's almost assumed that you have to compete here and that you need to think about hydrocarbons, everything else. What this process really tells you is that actually it's all about this side initially. Because of this volume cost curve, you're going to be over here. Now let's think about what we've been doing. So if we look at the market, you know, even within terrestrial solar, there's all sorts of markets in here, as we said. And if you think about technology, there's thin film, there's, you know, many different kinds of solar technology. And in implementation, you know, there's different kinds of models, because certainly you get a lot of different models with electrification. So you have, you know, power companies, you know, there's different structures of the industry, etc. Right? So, but with what we've described here, going between technology, you know, performance and the markets, and the implementation. Remember, implementation is the manufacturing infrastructure. This is small, dedicated manufacturing infrastructure. This is large, generic infrastructure because of the very high volume. You know, we're bouncing around our thing here to narrow down and realize that that satellite market is where we're going to have to be as a small company. Our technology fits in there well, so our you know, sort of 3.5 silicon technology needs to be keep on developing. There's several aspects of this technology that needs to be modified for different markets, and the implementation is going to be a fabless solar cell company, which is a new business model. Well, new in this, there's been different kinds of niche markets satisfied, but in general, in this sort of world, the you know, fabless, high efficiency solar cell company is a new concept. So that's where you know, this has converged, but on iteration. But now let's look at what's going on. You know, this is all from transactions. I've described this all through real transactions. I didn't just come up with this off the top of my head. And I want to tell you about us initially sitting here with 3.5 technology, like I was talking about, and going to the market for satellites, because that's, you know, we already iterated down this far, talking to many people, knowing about the science and technology, and, you know, basically finding out about the industry and how its models worked. Well, what we did was we soon discovered that in talking with the satellite guys, guess what? They actually, the reason this market exists, they do not care that much about, at least at the time this is many years ago because we started, like I said, the company in 2005. And at the time, they did not care about cost. So we have other attributes. In fact, one thing I didn't mention is that our efficiency can go higher. We can go even higher in efficiency, but again, kind of head towards silicon in terms of volume and cost. But it turns out that these materials and being on silicon allow us to change the band gaps in the semiconductor so that we're actually at higher efficiency. But the market didn't care about what we could save them that much. They were much more interested in efficiency now, not efficiency in the future, not efficiency after we evolve further. And for us, we had to take our current targets and try to get there. And so we found out that the combination, the attractiveness of, let's list our attributes as a company as we're iterating, we could have lower cost, right? And something that was a benefit to us, we could be fabless because we could access infrastructure that we didn't need to own. But remember, it translates into lower cost for the customer, but it doesn't really help this market that much. They don't care that much about the structure for power course. And so even though it makes us able to be profitable, it doesn't make a difference to them. We can have eventually higher efficiency, but not in the time frame that was important to them. So it's looking pretty grim. And then the last thing in this, as we converged in the satellite market, was that the time to market. It turns out that satellites, you need incredible reliability because people put them up there, and they really want to see them up there for a long time. And so unfortunately this means that it takes a very, very long time to prove reliability and get your products up there. So in the principle of understanding iteration, like we've been saying, let me clear this screen here and show you how we further added something we didn't realize. And so this gets back to adding things as you go along the process. So recall then that we're investigating predominantly the satellite one because it looked like our technology was going to fit in best there at low volume because we had no choice. And remember, the low volume was from the implementation thing. There were several things in here accessing silicon infrastructure. There was low cost at low volume for this particular satellite market because we could beat the cost of the very, very expensive dedicated 3.5 manufacturing. And there was other things in there. And in the technology, I didn't talk about it, but there was one invention that we did so that we could this is a technology invention, related to 3.5s being manufactured in silicon infrastructure. So see, here's the case where implementation is actually causing invention to occur. So we're converging on this, but I just mentioned all the negative, story about the satellites. So we're kind of looking like we're not going to converge after all. However, in the satellite market really represents different aspects of the government market. And here, when I say the government market, I'm not talking about the government telling other two parties to change, like in energy or something like that. This is actually a physical procurement, as in the typical traditional DoD case. Some satellites are purchased by the Department of Defense, and so the government acts as a customer here. It's not an investor. And what we'll talk about later in this class is that when the government acts as a market player and doesn't pick winners and losers by fiat, but by being a customer and wanting things to work, it turns out that there's less distortion to the innovation process. And so here, as we got to know the customers at market, we identified a new application. And that I will picture in red here. So all of a sudden, a new market application appeared. And so now this has allowed us to go further. And in fact, that new application is starting to converge with the same technology path. So the technology path didn't have to change that much. And the implementation model, silicon infrastructure with low-cost volume. So they're starting to come together. And this is an important case where this came in during the innovation process because of our interacting. So again, the idea that we have to start off with collections of things, that's a good process. That's a didactic way of talking about this innovation process. And that in the three elements, that we move along and let them interact, and we kind of focus on a few after a while, leaves you the impression that, you know, you do this up front and then you run away, and then, you know, some number of years later, the innovation pops out. And this is a good example of how that's not the case. And that even though you're narrowing this, these things can open up a little bit if you're open-minded. It can happen with technology or implementation too, where as you're coming along, something else you didn't know about or something else that's truly new appears. In this case, it was both. We didn't know about it and it was new. And that allowed us to converge on this new activity. So I hope that you know, all these things came from transactions. So you know, everything was done from, you know, essentially a customer, a business to business. And we formed this company when there was only two founders together, and we formed this LLC, and that's when we started these discussions over a long period of time. So hopefully that helps you see how all of these transactions affect the process and how new things can come into play. I think from that, we've already mentioned before, it should be very clear now that the market pull, technology push thing is just kind of silly, and that they're always pulling and pushing, and that you start where the uncertainty is highest. And we've given you examples of TWI and Contour. We started the market. Remember, the market in TWI was Kevin McGovern saying, you know, I want to go into water. And then in Contour, it was, we're going to build this new memory device, which is going to be on plastic, but, you know, and so cheaper towards DVD, but do what, you know, crystalline semiconductors do. And then in the case of 4Power, we actually started with that technology and then went to the market. We went and found the satellite market, but then found out that was going to work. Another market appeared to us during the innovation process, which we were able to hook onto, and that's driven the company forward further. And you'll see that Amberwave was also a technology-driven, if you wanted to call it that. I mean, remember, it's not really technology-driven. It just happened to start in that innovation element, and that you know, as soon as you start iterating, it's driven by all three, right? So this sort of big loop that we're starting. So to summarize, then, we discussed the process of reducing uncertainty. We've used our graphical representation throughout this discussion, and we discussed some real-world examples for you, and we added an important aspect, which is this transactional experiences. Through the 4Power example and the other things we've kind of mentioned, I hope that we've been able to communicate how you have to kind of really go out there and try to do it, filter out the noise, grab the pieces that affect your market application, your technology, or your implementation, and move forward. And reducing uncertainty, once again, this verifies that, you know, this market push market pull, it's constantly changing, and even with new pieces coming into the elements, as we talked about with that other application, shows that we should get rid of those linear type of thoughts.